Welcome to the J&B podcast. Here we are, Wednesday, the 8th of July, 2015. It's the week after the British Grand Prix was run and won by none other than Lewis Hamilton. It's the second consecutive season the Briton has won in front of his home fans. So we'll dissect that very interesting race where the weather gods really did spice up the action. We'll also take a look at the recent strategy group meeting, where there are some very interesting concepts which have been put on the table, but whether anything will come from this. There's also the GPDA survey, which was conducted a couple of months ago, and there's also some very interesting thoughts on behalf of the fans, which it's pretty early to tell whether they'll be embraced by the sport. There's also the Aston Martin link-up. They've been rumoured to be in discussions with Red Bull in tie-up with a Mercedes power unit supply. But there's also a couple of other interesting concepts around this potential collaboration. There's Mark Webber's autobiography, Aussie Grit. He's had some very interesting revelations which have come to light as a result of this, so we'll single out the interesting moments. And last but not least, for Nostalgia Straight, with the Ashes starting this evening, what better time to discuss the illustrious moments of the 2005 series? Who can forget, not least, Edgbaston, when it went right down to the wire. Anyway, I'm Baden Westerweller, and I'm joined today once again by Jawad Yaqub. How are you, Jawad?
Very well, thank you, Baden, and it's great to be on location for once to conduct today's proceedings, and yeah, looking forward to it.
Yes. Well, it's always good just to be in the one space together. We can get a lot more sort of a passion going, I guess, to be able to discuss a lot of the concepts. There's plenty to get through today, that's for sure. It was a cracker of a race on Sunday, probably one of the best of the season, you could say, not least the rain factor that naturally spiced up proceedings. But all the same, regardless of this, there was a lot happening from the first lap. We had Felipe Massa. He came from nowhere, really, stole everyone's thunder. He was leading the first few laps, but a lot of controversy came around this with Valtteri Bottas, who indeed assumed P2 after the early safety car, and there was a decisive moment with the decision to allow Massa to hold that P1. Ultimately, we saw Lewis Hamilton won the race. Williams didn't even get on the podium. It was a very costly moment, you could say. What are your thoughts, Jordan?
Well, kudos to Williams for getting into that position first of all on the start. Mercedes, they said after the race that it was poor grip. Because of poor grip, they didn't get away really well, and both Williams into the lead, and then Hamilton took Bottas on the first lap back, but we obviously had that safety car come out because of the kerfuffle that we had at turn 3, involving both Lotus cars, both McLarens, and interestingly Daniel Ricciardo, which I don't think was mentioned in the TV, but what happened was Ricciardo, I think, got bunched up with Grosjean. Grosjean then ran into his own teammate Maldonado, and then that concertinaed onto the McLarens where Alonso ran into Button. So yeah, there were 3 retirements on that first lap, both Lotuses. There was a bit of a disaster race for them, and then Button as well at his home Grand Prix, 16th home Grand Prix for him, and still no podium. But yeah, going back to Williams there, they got into that position, kudos to them, but it is really debatable as to whether they could have won the race if they had let Bottas past. And I think one thing that's difficult to factor in is if with the rain that occurred later on in the race, would it have been possible? Perhaps no, because we saw both the Williams cars of Massa and Bottas struggling in the rain on the intermediate tyres, where the Mercedes, they looked really natural in that. So perhaps if there wasn't rain and if Williams were a bit more commanding with their pit stops as well, we saw Hamilton take that undercut on lap 19 to go switch to the hard tyres, and that effectively put him in the lead of the race, because lap 20, Rosberg and Massa come in together, and then Bottas, who was the quickest of the 4, earlier on, he came in at the end on lap 21, and by then, it was too late. So perhaps if he had taken the lead, if he had, you were saying this to me before, in the 2 laps that Williams allowed him to race against Massa, he didn't push the urgency to make a move.
Well, if he was desperate enough, he would have made it stick. He had that call on just before the pit stops ultimately occurred to go for position. They said he had to make it obviously work out, if not to let Felipe essentially take back the lead. And he came close, but it didn't come off. And you heard Valtteri on the radio saying it was too late. And ultimately, that pretty much surmised their entire afternoon, because after that pit stop, they were indeed, as you say, Jawad, undercut by Hamilton, and from that point it was going to be probably a matter of second or third on the podium. And ultimately, as we saw, they didn't even glean that third position as a result of the rain. Whether this would have affected that potential for the podium, who knows, but ultimately they've got to come away from this weekend ruining what could have been.
Yeah, and even in the we'll talk about lap 43, that crucial lap, in a bit, but Williams, even then, they when it came to switching over to the intermediate tyres, Williams pitted both cars at the same time, effectively almost double stacking. And I think that is what ruined their chances of ending up on the podium, because having a double stack, it's a pretty... that's probably the least thing. Yeah, you don't want that at all. And Rosberg as well came in on the same lap as the 2 Williams for the pit stop on the intermediate tyres, and yeah, that ruined Rosberg's chance of effectively getting it in there with his teammate. But anyway, looking at the rest of the race, until then it was pretty nip and tuck between the top 4, the 2 Williamses and 2 Mercedes. Everyone was really surprised as how Williams were able to maintain, or if not have better pace than the Mercedes at that point. But then after that first phase of pit stops, that's when the momentum really changed. But we had quite a few retirements as well. So Felipe Nasser didn't even start the race. He had a gearbox issue in his Sauber. Daniel Ricciardo retired with some more engine problems. Again, Renault not coming to the table. Carlos Sainz as well retired, which triggered the virtual safety car. And this was before the rain kicked in, and Max Verstappen as well retired. So double DNFs for Toro Rosso, double DNFs for Lotus. And yeah, that opened up the opportunity for some points, unlikely points to go out, and look who other to get that than Fernando Alonso in the McLaren, belated points.
Still not a satisfied man, though, at the end of the race. He really didn't show any kind of relief that duck had finally been broken. Indeed, you have to look back to his debut season in 2001 with Minardi, the last time he failed to trouble those scorers. You'd think on account of run of 4 races it was in succession where he didn't even make it to the finish, that he would have had some kind of satisfaction, but ultimately he's in it to win the races, win titles, so it's not going to be anything that's going to leave him a happy man. And beyond that as well, though, we did see some other drivers who are up there and put in some impressive showings, not least Daniel Kvyat, who at one point, well, it was mentioned post-race by Christian Horner, he reckons he was in with a shout of a podium. I don't know about you, Jawad, but how realistic was this notion?
Well, we didn't really pay much attention to Kvyat during the race. I mean, he was part of that interesting battle going on 5th in the first part of the race, where you had a train of cars. There was Hulkenberg in 5th, and you had the 2 Ferraris led by Kimi Räikkönen, Sebastian Vettel, the 2nd Ferrari. You had Kvyat, you had Sainz, and you had Perez in there as well. And then, ultimately, once the rain hit, it threw everything into a scramble. You had Kimi Räikkönen pitting too early for the intermediate tyres. That's effectively what ruined his race. There was a bunch of guys who pitted early. Ericsson as well, he came in early, and the 2 Madame Marushas as well, Mary and Stevens. So, yeah, Kvyat sort of went under the radar that race, and he's in the end gleaned the results that Ricciardo was unable to. Not of his own volition, of course, but again, it's ever since he's got that kick up the backside from Dr. Helmut Marko, it seems that Kvyat is really punching in the results, albeit in an underperforming Red Bull.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to see whether these kind of results can be improved. Perhaps, as we've said a few times now, Hungary might be a bit more suited to their liking, as the circuit Monaco was when we saw them really in contention for that 3rd position for the majority of the evening. But But on that notion anyway, for third position, it was Sebastian Vettel who really made the most of the conditions. He came from, as it were, trailing Kimi for the majority of the afternoon. He was looking on track for perhaps P5 or P6, and he's emerged with that third position, which he was quite happy about at the end of the day.
And Williams would have, been ruining about that for sure. They, at one point, they would have been on for at least having one car finish on the podium, if not two.
Yeah, you would have thought P2 even would have been realistic for a while there.
So. And then to the point where they had no cars on the podium, they were beaten by their rival in the Constructors' Championship, Ferrari, who, despite Raikkonen's result, they still scored some pretty healthy points with that podium as well. And I think it all comes down to that magic lap, lap 43, where both Hamilton and Vettel decide to come in for the intermediate tyres, and it proved that was the magic lap to cross over. Come in a lap early, you would be, as we saw with Raikkonen and co, you'd be in trouble. Come in a lap later, you would have lost a lot of time. And that's what we saw with Rosberg in this, especially in the coming through the second part of the lap after the national pits into Maggots and Beckett's. It was getting really wet, and on the slick tyres, he couldn't really make a really good in-lap. And as a result, Hamilton was able to get a good lead whilst Rosberg was coming out of the pits, and that was race over.
What we had seen prior to that point was Rosberg was really reining in Hamilton at quite a rapid rate, and then it all changed very suddenly. Hamilton made that inspired call. It was quite late indeed that he darted into the pits, and there was a lot of dubious comments being made on the Sky commentary team that whether this was going to cost him the race, but ultimately within the lap he was vindicated, and from that point he just marched home, and said at the end of the day he was quite emotional in that last lap, seeing all these parochial countrymen and women in the stands cheering him on.
Well, I think he said something after something like, this is the best decision I've ever made in my life, best call I've made.
He was quite happy to take credit for it.
Yeah, take credit for it, but I guess it sort of makes up for the gaffe that they had in Monaco, where he came in under the safety car and then lost the win to Rosberg, and I guess it makes amends for that. But good call for Hamilton, I guess, and perfect opportunity to give out a shout to one of my mates, Patrick, who said to me before the race, Rosberg won't win, it'll be Hamilton. So congratulations on your prediction there.
Non-audible clap.
Yeah, I'm sure he'll be listening when we make it live. So good on you for predicting that. But also good result for Force India as well with their B-Spec car. They both scored points.
Absolutely. Well, really, when you look back earlier in the year, they were lucky to pick up a point or two here or there, and now they seem to have, since Austria, gone ahead of even Red Bull. They're now in that 6th or 7th trajectory, and it's a sign that the patience has really paid off. Whether it's going to be enough for someone like Nico Hülkenberg, who's perennially looking at that next step, whether he'll end up wanting to stay on or move possibly to sports cars if he gets turned away once more by a Ferrari or a Williams. But still, it's obviously a sign that this development and the delays which they encountered pretty much from around China, Bahrain, they kept saying next race it had come, delayed till Austria, then it didn't come till last weekend at Britain. Clearly they've made the right development curve here.
Yeah, indeed. And they are still, I think, 30 or so points behind Red Bull in the standings. So if they can string together consistent results, I'm sure they can overtake Red Bull come the second part of the season. Red Bull obviously still under that cloud of reliability on the Renault side. I mean, it was good that this weekend we didn't see engine penalties come in. I think overall the racing was, a lot of people on social media were pretty pleased with what they saw, and they were saying, F1 is back to its F1 is back to what its glory or whatever. And then who knows, if next race we have another processional race, it'll be back to the same criticisms as always, isn't it?
Well, we didn't see any engine sanctions, which was a relief, but we did see plenty of authority stamped on the Saturday by none other than local hero Nigel Mansell. He was very happy to exert that authority. It clearly affected a few of those drivers for the grid, not least Ricciardo, but ultimately that didn't matter because he had his retirement. But was good to see from that on-track perspective. There was nothing really that ruined the race, all these gimmicky drive-through or stop-go penalties that really are farcical.
Yeah, Nigel would have had some great fun on the Saturday there. But yeah, overall, I think this race will get a tick from pretty much everyone. You give it a tick as well, just to be sure, 100%.
Oh, I don't know. Thinking back through the season, pretty clearly number one of the year.
Yeah.
It's pretty hard. That race had everything when you think about it. You couldn't have asked for more to occur without having a headache. So if we can get close to this, obviously the rain's not going to be a constant throughout the year. But if the kind of action in the first half of the race where you've got this other team that's really at least harrying Mercedes, as we saw with Ferrari, not least earlier in the season, really causing those headaches for the Brackley squad, that's always going to be a positive. And if this leads to some kind of action, then all for it. But that was the British Grand Prix. It's come and gone for another year. We'll move on now to this strategy group meeting, which took place before the Grand Prix. There was quite a few interesting outcomes from this, not least yet another clampdown on the so-called driver aids, which had already been enforced from last season with the coaching aspect, which is, when you see Nico Rosberg constantly quoting for where his teammate might be. We've now got another ban that's going to come into force from Belgium. Do you want to enlighten us on the particulars here?
Yeah, so there's going to be another clampdown on the communication between drivers and their teams on the radio. I think they introduced this last year in Singapore, and obviously they felt that it wasn't as stringent as it could be. There were still drivers getting aid as to what's going on track and whatnot. And I think the ban is going to be enforced, especially during qualifying and the race. I think in practice, more or less, because it's practice, they'll be allowed to get references and whatnot. But yeah, that's what people want to see, spectators want to see. They want to see more of the driver taking control of the situation and whatnot. And especially, when you've got guys like Rosberg and Hamilton, who are supposedly, top guys, you want to see them putting their own nous into it. Obviously, they would still be able to communicate about reliability issues where terminal and whatnot for safety reasons. But yeah, as you were alluding to earlier, just communicating regarding to reference to what's my teammate doing, what's he doing, blah, blah, blah. I think, they're going to take a stance on that and cut it out for sure.
Call me a bit extreme, but I'd love to see the day where all radio is eradicated. You've got to rely on the pit board and instinct just comes into it. And if there's an error or something that's not notified by that pit board means, or if the driver can't have a sense of their own possible vulnerabilities in the car and they're out and tough luck, and it's really a battle of the best in the end of the day, and just instinct comes into it. I don't know about you, Jawad, but could be going too far, but I reckon that'd really make for spicy action.
Yeah, it would make for spicy action indeed. But one point that I think would go against that in that regard is the fact how complicated the steering wheels have become. They're effectively like running a laptop or a tablet, in the car. So imagine driving the car at, 320 kilometers an hour and then making numerous amounts of changes as you go. And essentially you have to be the best multitasker in the world to be able to do that. And then taking away, certain references that they rely on, would make it even more I don't know if it's possible.
Perhaps on this notion, they could simplify the actual logistics of the wheel and just return it in the mold of no communication, just very simplistic, just more. This makes you go faster. This brakes.
Yeah, just give it. Give them the old-fashioned, round steering wheel. No fancy buttons or LCD display.
Yeah, that'd be something. It'd be a good cost-cutting measure. That's for sure. They're not cheap, those wheels these days.
No,
£10,000 or whatever.
£10,000 or whatever. And then you've got guys like Hamilton, if you recall, Valencia 2012, chucking his wheel out of the car, and
Barrichello 2010,
Barrichello, yeah, and I think
at Monaco,
and I think there was a HRT or something that came and
just
ran over the
Williams
wheel.
weren't
Yeah.
happy with him, that's for sure. They were asking for the bill on the end of that one. But
I remember watching that scene, on repeat. It was a joke back in the day. We laughed every time we watched it, and the crunch of the steering wheel.
Well, the wheel was barely even touched. It had a bit of a dint in it, but it seemed to be intact almost, so it's sturdy stuff.
Yeah, obviously carbon fiber, so that's where all the money goes into making these things
Good
pretty
souvenir.
tough. Yeah.
But anyway, we'll move on from that. Whether this all really does have an influence, we won't know until post summer break at Belgium, as it's going to recur from then on. We've got this fifth engine, which has finally been granted. Only to Honda, though, which is fair enough. It's retrospectively now they get this extra PU, which is sorely needed for them if they're not going to encounter more or less every single Saturday the need to replace and be consigned as it is already. They're clearly not going to advance further than that bottom 2 or 3 rows, but now they've got the chance of just starting clean slate on the Sunday without too much to worry about.
Yeah, well, with having another engine as well, it means they can use some of their tokens as well, because obviously with the token system, you have to use it on one of your engines. So you can't have like a separate engine for it. You've got to use your tokens on one of your allocated 4 engines, or in now Honda's case 5 engines. So if they want to, use some of their tokens up for development, then yeah, they've got the opportunity to do it now. But interestingly, regarding Honda's engine development, I think Jonathan Neal, McLaren's racing director in Canada, said something like, a lot of the development being done on the engine at the moment falls within the reliability regulation. So that means they can make changes to the engine for means of reliability, not performance. So and that's one thing that they need to sort of get rolling before looking at performance.
Yeah,
reliability.
I think one breeds another, really. They've got to get to the finish line first. They can't go all out saying they've got the best engine and then blow up after 10 laps or whatever. It's just not going to be a good look. So at the end of the day, they might as well be at the back and then take the hit there rather than seeing possibly glorious results going begging every other weekend.
Yeah, and again, that 10th place for Alonso, whilst to some it might not be as important, for others it is, especially the guys developing the car. Yes, they've, after a recent run of bad results, they've actually made the race distance, tick that off. They've scored a point. Yeah, that's just a bonus. So getting to the end of the race is what they need to do. Obviously, Button's non-finishing in that event was not of his own volition. It was
although you got to admit, what would Ron think? It's only their second point of the second race scoring event of the season out of 9 now. He'd be thinking, come on, guys, where's the consistency?
You can't be right.
Meant to score no points throughout the year to be consistent. But, I'd say, even though this Ron, who at Monaco was pretty cheesed off when they asked him whether he was happy to finally break that duck, he will take any points he can as much as he wants that victory every single
I think
race.
a guy like Ron would obviously, points would not really be on the agenda. He's in it to win it, and it's been 2 years, more than 2 years now since they've last won a race. So
was a bit of an addendum to Ron. Indeed, we had Eddie Jordan come out and really ask what's happened since Martin Whitmarsh, that is, was given the flick at the end of 2013. He said that Ron's really taken them nowhere in the time, and Ron's response to Eddie, who he actually got along with quite nicely in their days as a colleagues, essentially, when Eddie ran his eponymous outfit in the late 90s, early 2000s. He's called Eddie Jordan a village idiot.
Yeah, he says every village has its idiot. I think it was an interview with Martin Brundle he did with Sky Sports, and he discussed Martin brought up the points that Eddie made, and Ron's response basically was every village has its idiot. So don't think there's much more we can say about that. But
well, David Coulthard came out. This is a surprising one. He was employed by Ron for 9 seasons, and yet he's come staunchly to the defence of his colleague at the BBC there. So it's good to see that, DC clearly he's got some opinion on the matter, and he's quite passionate about this situation. The ultimate fact is, though, McLaren still, they've got a long way to go to turn this curve around. It's not going to be happening anytime soon, you wouldn't think.
Definitely. They're going to keep going, and we'll see later on what happens as a result. But moving on.
Yeah, well, this one's a bit of a dull moment once again. It's refueling, the one that everyone really, well, you could say according to the GPDA survey we're going to mention shortly, they do want it, but I don't really think the consensus in the paddock is they want it back. They want it gone for good. And the end of discussion. So now it's been said by this strategy group, no refueling.
Yep, and I think it's good riddance to that. What are you getting? What are you going to get from refueling? More costs, more unsafe in the pits. Sure, we've had some spectacular moments with fireballs and whatnot, but ultimately it is a safety thing. And come on, if the cars are boasting efficiency, they can finish a race on 100 kilograms of fuel without having to. I mean, in some occasions, yes, they have to fuel save, which is very, very annoying to see. But if they can run the race distance and whatnot, and they're trying to promote a bit of fuel efficiency, well, what's refueling going to do? I think it's just an unnecessary gimmick, pretty much. And we'll talk about it later on in regards to the GPDA survey.
Yeah, we'll move a bit further on to some of the more interesting points which were gleaned from this meeting. First of all, being this, it's been mentioned, I guess, from time to time in the past, but now it's been really put solidly on the agenda, that of the Saturday sprinter race notion, in terms of this would settle the essential grid for the proper race on a Sunday in lieu of qualifying. This sprint race would be. It'd be a qualifying race in essence.
Yeah, so that was probably one of the biggest points to come out of that meeting, is that they actually are, obviously there's been rumours and whisperings of looking at format changes, but if this is what was discussed in that meeting at Biggin Hill, and they're looking at perhaps adding a race on, additional race on Saturday, and perhaps that might be like a qualifying race.
What are your thoughts? Are you for or against this? Like we've seen, obviously in V8s, as you say, the sprint to the grid notion, it often results in a lot of carnage. Whether these teams would be reluctant to see their preciously constructed bodywork go up in smoke, flames, splinters of carbon fibre, whatever you want to call it, whether this would really have them on edge, that their Sundays would be compromised. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, for the fans and spectators, it would be good because it will give a bit of action on the Saturday as well. So you'd see them racing wheel to wheel and whatnot, and it depends on who you are, if you want to be conservative or not during that race. But if you're fighting out for grid positions, there's going to be no points on. If you're going to be fighting for grid positions, sure, some guys will be showing more attrition than others, and in that also, looking from a team's point of view, the number one issue will be, yes, if there is attrition and you end up wrecking your car, which often is, as we saw with that pile up at turn 3 on the first lap at Silverstone, you're going to be in a bit of a muck come the actual race on the next day.
You'd almost have to look at these T cars of yesteryear and possibly extra power units to replace any
and the power units are another thing.
Not to mention tyres too.
Yeah,
they need more.
We've seen this year how limited the running is on Friday practice for some of the teams because they want to preserve those power units, only being allowed 4. If you're adding in another race, and obviously when it comes to race, you've got to turn the wick up and be a bit more aggressive. Is that really viable in terms of cost? They want to cut costs, but then you're introducing measures, introducing new things where, you're going to use more of your engines when you only have 4. Sure, a solution to that will be have more power units for the season, but some of the teams won't be able to afford it.
Well, an interesting proponent of this notion is, in fact, Lewis Hamilton, who did come out and say that he spent his entire career under this current model with the 3 phases of the qualifying on the Saturday and the traditional race on the Sunday. He's saying essentially he's all for this spicing up of the action. I don't know. Clearly, it's a divisive topic amongst the drivers, but to have the reigning world champion come out and lend it his support, it's quite a big voice there behind this concept.
Well, they'll certainly have to investigate it a bit more. See, what the how can they formulate the regulations around it. In terms of cost, yeah, sure, it might increase costs for some of the guys.
Well, it's something they've got to go all in for. They can't be haphazard about it.
Yeah,
say, let's
no,
just
not
rock
haphazard,
up with
and
the
that's
current like set of tires, current engine, and say,
yeah.
well, if you're out on Saturday qualifying race, you're out for Sunday. They've got to really make sure they put in the proper investment to make it as successful as the race.
And that's what, you know, I find a bit concerning about some of these decisions that are being made, because they feel that they're under pressure to make changes. They're sort of rushing in things. They say, oh yeah, for 2016 this is going to happen, 2017 this is going to happen. But as you mentioned that word before, haphazard, you have to be all or nothing, you know, otherwise it's just gonna make things worse before they get better.
And really, this qualifying, I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with it, this whole concept. It comes down to the wire in Q3, and it's always often enthralling those dying moments. I don't see the real need to eradicate it.
Oh, the only problem with it, though, is I guess the fact they see that some of the teams don't really utilise qualifying.
Well, that would be something. You'd think there's almost got to be a compulsory aspect, if anything, added. You have to do one run. You can't just sit there or go out and just say, oh, I've done a lap, so I get this extra position because I was on the circuit. Yeah,
that's essentially what the point is. But it's something we definitely watch this space, see how we go. In the V8s, as you mentioned before, the sprint for the grid idea that they have it during the Sandown 500. On the Saturday, they have qualifying in the morning, which decides the grid for the sprint race, and then obviously that sprint race will decide the grid for the big 500-kilometre race that happens on the Sunday. And knowing V8s as well as we do, there is always carnage, and yeah, sometimes it's not a pretty sight to see, you know, cars, you know, going off and being destroyed on the Saturday, and then on Sunday, well, because the rules are a bit more relaxed, you know, they may repair them overnight. You know, Parc Fermé is not as stringent in there as it is in F1, but yeah, they often repair the cars come Sunday.
I'm sure this will be something we discuss as the season progresses, when we get closer to knowing whether this will be realised, this notion of the Saturday sprint race. But anyway, we're going to move on to the final point from the meeting. It was the notion of the rubber, the tyres with Pirelli. They're now investigating this what I mentioned to a few weeks ago rather confusingly as a tyre within a tyre, compounds within each option, prime, wet, whatever they may be, saying there could be 3 variations to each compound. And on top of this, the notion that teams can pick their compounds to bring into an event.
Yeah, they're giving more open choice as to what tyres the teams bring into the event, and I think they wanted much more wider compounds as well, which will be interesting to see whether Pirelli agrees to it. Michelin, as we talked about the other week, are looking to get back into the sport, so could this open up the possibility for another tyre war, Michelin versus Pirelli? But yeah, we'll definitely look into it as the season progresses.
All right, we're going to move on now to the GPDA survey, which was conducted back around the time of the Monaco Grand Prix. It had a very encouraging response in terms of numbers. We had 217,000 over that number take part in this survey, which was quite lengthy from recollection. Probably took the best part of half an hour. But the key findings of this were that the fans aren't really in favour of the gimmicks, which they're so-called, the reverse grid concept, or these customer franchise inverted comma cars as they're being labelled, and also that fans do want this aforementioned tyre war between incumbent suppliers Pirelli and Michelin if they were to return, and they also want the refuelling, which seems to have been dead and buried, as we mentioned as well earlier.
Well, that's interesting. The fans, inverted commas, as you were saying before, said they didn't want gimmicks, but they wanted refueling.
It's a bit contradictory when they want one but not the other, when it's all the same notion of the gimmicks.
You know, I've already made my case clear regarding refueling. Was there anything you would like to add to that? Or
no, refueling, I think it's really had its time in F1. Clearly, we saw Michael Schumacher was the master of it in the day. It was great to look at then. It still is now, but in the current climate, really, just from a cost perspective, it's not really suitable to see it back anytime soon.
And it's they're running a Grand Prix distance, not an endurance race, so don't really need for refueling. So I think that's done and dusted. But
as for the tyre war, though, I reckon I'd be quite a keen advocate for it. I enjoyed that the height of the Bridgestone. We had Bridgestone initially with Goodyear initially, and Bridgestone when they came in for 97, and ultimately Goodyear went on their way. Bit of time with the Bridgestone monopoly. Then Michelin came in. Took a few years to get their tyres to be competitive. Then we saw them take over when the Ferrari domination era ended after 2004. But then the events of 05 we had
Indianapolis,
that was really the trigger point. From that moment, Michelin were on out the door, and then Bernie wanted the single supplier again, so back to Bridgestone. And pretty much since that 2007 year, we had Bridgestone till 2010. Pirelli took over that mantle. 5 years on, they're still the sole supplier. But now I think it's time just to freshen things up. You see Pirelli saying they're happy to keep going along, keeps the costs lower. Obviously, you're going to have a tyre war. There'll be spiralling and costs out of control as they develop to get that more competitive edge. But I reckon really it'll be another component on top of what we already see.
And it depends on ultimately what the regulations will dictate the tyre. So if this is what the regulations say, this is how the tyre is going to be. I mean, Pirelli, as I've mentioned on previous editions, they're only going to make a tyre that, going off what they're told to. So when they came in 2011, the commercial rights holders and Bernie Ecclestone, they said, this is how we want you to make the tyre. We want you to make a tyre that will last a third or a quarter of the race. And Pirelli have done that. So if Pirelli were asked to make a tyre that will last 100% or 50% of the race, like the Bridgestones used
2010, who remembers that one?
Yeah.
The rock hard tyre, bulletproof.
Yeah, the bulletproof tyres. If they were told to make bulletproof tyres, they'd make bulletproof tyres. So that's the case regarding them. So yeah, tyre war would be nice to see.
Yeah, we're both in favour of that one. We'll see what happens when the tender process is announced, the outcome in coming weeks. It's meant to be known, I think, sometime very soon, but whether there's more deliberations, if this Michelin bid is compelling, we'll have to wait and see, perhaps during the mid-season break. Anyway, the last point to glean from this survey is that, not really a surprising one, I'm the most popular driver. Kimi Räikkönen, yep, clearly number one.
Voted by the fans.
The notion of this, though, is interesting because it looks like he's halfway out the door at Maranello. And on that note, you can't really see any other outfit which would take his services on. So he could be facing the winding up of his career, despite the fact that he's the overwhelming favourite of all the fans around the globe.
Indeed, and they've expressed themselves, said he's their favourite, and
perhaps we should have a decision, democratic vote. If you're the number one most popular, you're guaranteed a seat, maybe for an independent team. It's the fans' team.
Imagine that, the times come where the fans are voting for who drives for who. Instead of having a silly season, we're like,
Lewis Hamilton,
yeah,
you're turfed, had enough of you leaving, you're out the door. Get rid of you.
We have an overwhelming majority vote Lewis Hamilton out the door.
Everyone
Mercedes,
votes.
or
we want Pastor Maldonado in the Mercedes.
We want, or we want Fernando Alonso in a car where he can win a world championship.
That would be something, yeah. I'd like to see him really given his best chance. Him against Vettel, him against Hamilton, and Ricciardo as well to an extent. Obviously, he's had these links, which we'll discuss in future episodes naturally.
Yeah,
whether he could go to
we're
Ferrari.
Gonna have, obviously, when this mid-season break comes around, we'll have a 1 week dedicated to talking about the silly season.
We'll just go completely tabloid style.
Tabloid style, yeah.
Put our journalistic morals out the window.
Pastor Maldonado's link with Ferrari. What did you think of that?
There we go. Get ready for the sensationalist headlines.
Yeah. The Bolivars are coming to Maranello.
It'll be spectacular. Give it another 3 weeks, and it'll be gasping your breath left, right, and centre. Anyway, we've got to press on here. There's so much more to discuss. It came to light over the British Grand Prix weekend that Aston Martin are keen to return to F1, but not in the traditional method. Indeed, not even on a you could say technical or sporting level. It's more of a sponsorship tie-up in the mould of Red Bull's current association with the Infinity sports car maker. They want to have some kind of side pod deal, you could say, which would be in collaboration with Mercedes. This is in the notion that Red Bull have now been linked with all this tedium between them and their Renault engine supply. They've been very quick to shoot their mouth off about them pretty much every other weekend this season. And now it's come to light that Mercedes could be a potential new suitor for Red Bull under the guise of Aston Martin.
Well, as discussed a few weeks ago regarding, the Red Bull and Ferrari link up, what benefit would it be to Red Bull to be running a customer engine effectively?
Yeah, what's the difference at the end of
There's
the day?
no difference. And I think Niki Lauda as well, the non-executive chairman of Mercedes, said he said when he was asked about this, he's like, there's no discussion at all. I have breakfast with every morning with Helmut, so I should know. And he was, yes, and yeah, he's obviously referring to Dr. Helmut Marko, Red Bull's senior advisor, and he says that he mentioned on that front. And
you know what that means? It's code word for yes. It's a signed deal.
It's a
stand by
deal.
for announcements.
Stand by for announcement.
Watch this space.
I think where this this sort of report or rumor, if it was taken from, was UK industry magazine for automotives, Autocar, suggested this because Adrian Newey, the chief aerodynamicist at Red Bull, was actually designing a new hypercar for Aston Martin. So taking his Red Bull link over to the Aston Martin Motor Company and designing a new hypercar. And obviously from there, some kind of link is formed towards Aston Martin potentially coming into F1, and in that more so side pod deal as well. And
on that concept, I guess if Adrian Newey is collaborating with Aston Martin, this probably lend to the thought that they're looking beyond just a purely commercial, as Greg Rust would say, commercial break in that sense, commercial deal with Red Bull. Maybe he's looking at actually collaborating in a technical sense that Aston Martin could have this input beyond just being a pure sponsor.
Yeah, well, Aston Martin making their own power units, that would be something, wouldn't it? It's probably the most least probably the least expected thing I would think of, but I don't know if this has legs or not. We'll have to see over the coming weeks as to what happens. We all know that Red Bull is committed to Renault in contractual terms to the end of 2016, and I was only reading this morning that Red Bull CEO and founder Dietrich Mateschitz said that it's either Renault or nothing in 2016. So I think they're all looking at remaining together until their contract goes. But yeah, post 2016 is something we'll have to look forward to.
Yeah, it all ties in, of course, to that notion of the Enstone squad, currently known as Lotus, in this new iteration being reacquired by Renault from the Genie Group, and essentially as they were until 2010, the Renault factory outfits. So clearly they're going to have their full attentions there if this did happen. So who knows whether that'll take effect for next season or for 2017, which would tie in nicely to this notion of Red Bull remaining with Renault until pretty much the 2017 when we have this new regulations come in. That would be probably the right time to make any jump. But anyhow, we're going to move on to Aussie Grit, Mark Webber's autobiography. It's a compelling read, really, and both of us here have made light work of it. We're very much reaching the pointy end of it. It's fair to say that he doesn't hold back old Webber. You would expect nothing less. Or as Flavio Briatore would say, you want this, Webber? Yes. And pretty much has to comply with it instantly. Very good read there, you could say, what he had to say about pretty much Flavio in particular, because he had him, or he still has an association with the man going back to his early F1 days. But beyond that, we got a revealing insight into his sports car days when he diverted from the single-seater scene to sports cars for 98 and 99 to spearhead Mercedes Le Mans efforts. And you had a lot to say about this, didn't you, Jawad?
Yeah, well, obviously I'm not as far into the book as you. Just think on his second season with Jaguar and F1, but yeah, I found it really compelling going through his first attempt at a sports car career because of how how it really taught him discipline as a driver. Obviously, in his first stint as a open wheel driver, you alluded to this earlier before we came on air, saying how he was pretty arrogant and he was not really good at, he wouldn't bother setting up the car. He would just go out and set the fastest time, and yeah, if that was it. But yeah, Mercedes-Benz really taught him a bit of discipline, and this came in the form of his teammate and good friend Bernd Schneider, who had been in this game for quite some time. And yeah, he really taught him how to discipline himself in the car and look to extract, you know, the best possible lap times. This is what you would do. And yeah, just going through that part of his career in the book was really good, as well as every other facet of the book. I think it really opens up the difficulties that young racing drivers, particularly not from a European scene, face, especially from Australia. A difficult, you know, challenge it is for them.
So isolated compared to being European or American.
Yeah, and also the not having a lot of money in your corner either, because
well, he went heavily on David Campese and Yellow Pages.
Yeah, he had to sort of plead with sponsors to come and sponsor him, and I think there was a point when he was testing a number of F1 cars early on. I don't know if you recall, but he got overlooked in one case for a fellow Aussie, Paul Dumbrell, who brought a bit of money over with him to get that F1 test. But ultimately it was Webber who ended up driving an F1. Paul Dumbrell didn't. He came back and had a successful run in V8s as a co-driver. But yeah, just money talks, and that's essentially the what the underlying factor of this book, what Mark talks about.
Well, as it goes, he eventually made it to F1. Minardi initially, he was on a 3-race contract, but that all changed quite rapidly after that. An illustrious afternoon at Melbourne in 2002. Who can forget that 10-car pile-up on the first lap, which Webber avoided, and then he held off Mika Salo when Toyota on debut there, and he ended up going up on the podium afterwards. It's not something you normally see someone off the top 3 there who gets to go up there in this
yeah, a bit of a breach of protocol there. But I found it interesting in the book. Mark had written that he had a visit in the garage from Michael Schumacher's manager Sabine Kem, and said, "Oh, Michael would be graced with your pleasant presence in the Ferrari garage." And they went, and it was only so that obviously Michael had won that afternoon, and he wanted a picture taken with Webber.
Operator, he didn't want to let that one be forgotten.
Yeah, he wanted a picture taken so that the headlines the next morning on the front page, and this is exactly what Mark wrote. He didn't want the headlines or the photos on the front page of the paper just to be Mark. He wanted his face to be on there too. So a bit of a sly move there from old Shuey, but who could blame him, you know?
No, not one of his major indiscretions, you could say, amongst the on-track stuff that happened. But anyway, we're going to press on a bit more with Webber. I'd say what I took away most of all was this interesting concept when he really was at a crossroads at the conclusion of his initial Milton Keynes tenure after 2004. He had the choice of going to a Renault alongside his good friend Fernando Alonso, where the team was being run by, of course, Flavio, or there was the Williams, which was more of a romantic notion to Mark, having seen, you know, his compatriot Alan Jones take the title there about 25 years earlier.
Williams' first ever drivers' world championship.
Yeah, of course. That's where it all really begun for them, that Williams dynasty. So in the end, he took on that Williams challenge. Of course, they had the BMW supply then, not customer. It was the fully backed factory operation, and he pretty much went there, and things just went down the tube from that first race to an extent. After the 7th or 8th event, Frank Williams and Patrick Head were telling him, in more or less, get out the door as soon as you can. We don't want you. We're disappointed. And with his tail between his legs, within 2 years, he was back at Red Bull, and that's where he ended up for the next 7 seasons. Of course, as you get to the end of the book, the more revealing, juicy details about, 2010 Turkey, 2013 Malaysia, and how Helmut Marko essentially had no time for him comes to light. It's all very compelling stuff, as you'll find out soon enough, Jordan. For everyone who's reading the book, it's very juicy, so it's well worth a read. But
yeah, definitely a good read. We both recommend it highly to, if you're fans of Mark Webber, even if you're not fans of Mark Webber, just about F1 in general. It's pretty revealing to...
the inner workings.
The inner workings. And we'll definitely we're both looking forward to a book signing he's doing in a week's time. We'll be going to Big W, I think it is.
Yeah, that'll be great fun.
Shopping centre, and getting some autographs on our books.
All right, our last point, nostalgia straight. It's couldn't be overlooked. This evening, what is it now? 1:40. So in about 6.5 hours, the first ball will have been delivered in anger for the opening test at Cardiff, the 2015 Ashes series. It's now 10 years on.
And although this isn't exactly F1, we couldn't help but looking back at 2005, the 2005 series, 10 years ago from today, and how both of us, not really cricket tragics anymore, but
had its time and place. But it seems the politics tend to have, put that real closeness, a bit of a wedge between it. But obviously the Ashes are an exception every time they roll around.
Yeah, Ashes is probably the only exception I have for cricket these days, and who wouldn't? Contest between old rivals, Australia versus England, and 2005, what a enthralling series that was.
I think it'll be seared into the minds of all those who viewed that epic couple of months. Pretty much every test had its tale. It really was, as we were discussing prior to this, a soap opera. There was always a turnaround every corner, and not least that second test where Australia went into the series once again. They were on top of their game heading into it.
Yeah, they were the best team in the world at that point, as in test. In all formats, actually, in one day and test at the time. And England, they had a pretty young team, most of which who had never played an Ashes test before. They were ready to be blooded in. But again, they had some heroes to come out of it, like some Michael Vaughan, Freddie Flintoff.
KP.
Yeah, Kevin Peterson, who debuted as well.
Yeah, who can forget the skunk look back then that he had? Like
I think they all had a unique look back then, especially with the blonde tips in their hair and whatnot.
Yeah, it's a blast from the past. If you've got that review DVD and you put it in, a long time has passed between then, even though it's only a decade. Really.
It has only been a decade, and that's the amazing thing. But yeah, that second test, elaborate a bit more on it.
Yeah, well, we saw that first test. Australia ended up winning that one quite decisively, and it really did look like they had set the momentum. But who can forget the eve of the second test commencing, that ball, Glenn McGrath twisting that ankle, and pretty much his entire series was compromised beyond the point that he was an instant withdrawal from that second test at Edgbaston, which Ricky Ponting ultimately decided to bowl on against many people's popular belief to bat first. And pretty much at England, they took the reign. I think they would have scored over 400 runs on that opening day, which you seldom see in cricket, until the notion of the latter day, the 400, which is scored in one day, is time in, time out. The run rates obviously increased, but back then that was a huge total.
Yeah, back in my day.
Yeah, back in the ancient era of 2005. Yeah, but that happened. England really set the running. Australia were up against it. They went to day 3 stumps. They had would have been close to 100 to win, 2 wickets in hand. And when the 9th wicket fell, they had it all to do.
Shane Warne and Brett Lee at that time worked together. And then
once Warney went out, it was all to do for Casper the Ghost. And
Matthew Michael Kasprowicz, sorry. And very admirable, you have to say, in the end. Came within 2 runs, and then that delivery from Harmison and sent Casper all over the place, a bit crossed up. And
Richie Benaud, what did he say? Kasprowicz, the man to go.
The man to go. And just talking about Richie, it's just going to be quite sad going into the series, knowing that the great man, the voice, won't be around commentating. Neither Tony Gregg either, even though that was quite a few years ago.
We still have good old Chappelli to give us his idiosyncratic wisdom from back in the day, though.
Back in the day of everything. If only Bill Laurie were able to make the trip up there, that would have been good as well. But England ended up winning that series 2-1, which for all us Aussies, it was just, we were, gobsmacked. We were like, this is a young team that didn't really have any credentials as far as we were concerned, and they had gone and dethroned the likes of Hayden, Gilchrist, Langer, Martin, and the best bowlers in the world, McGrath obviously had his injury, but yeah.
That's probably the genesis. That moment onwards really swung momentum in England's favour, because McGrath wasn't the same when he did come back for that third and ultimately fifth test after missing the fourth one. That really was decisive. And as a postscript to that all, the anticipation around the 2006 series back in Australia, I could say it was unparalleled.
It was
nationwide stopping for that first test.
Yeah, well, it's sort of similar to what happened the most recent Ashes series, 2013-14, where we lost over in England.
Well, of course, it was back-to-back as a result of this World Cup.
Yeah, it was back-to-back, so it was only a matter of months, a few months before England were on home soil. On our home soil,
in 6 months of the Ashes, that was quite something.
Yeah, and it was only a matter of a few months before England were on our home soil, and the momentum shifted completely. England were able to win that series over there in 2013, but then coming to Australia, yes, there was a lot of expectation, but at the same time, the people, spectators are like, they were worried or they didn't really care. But after what happened at the Gabba, the first test, people were up in arms. They were like, we better rally behind
Jonathan Trott, of course, that infamous moment where he went home after confronting Mitchell Johnson, and there was no love lost between Michael Clarke and James Anderson, words to the effect of, "I'll break your arm."
Yeah.
That pretty much set it off, war of words for the rest of the series. And
Stuart Broad as well, who's being booed.
Being booed. Cult villain for that series, you could say.
Yeah.
And now they're back already 2 years later. It's coming around almost every other year now, the Ashes, but this will be the last for a while. And obviously Australia now haven't won a series in the UK since 2001, so it's nigh time for them to get it right when they're on foreign soil. It'll be a big moment.
And considering the momentum they have at the moment, I don't think they've lost a test for more than 12 months now.
Oh, of course, they did have that exception over in the UAE to Pakistan, but that really did give way to a home summer where they were quite dominant over the Indians.
How can I forget that? That was
beyond that, though. You could say Australia. That was more down to the conditions just being very much suited to the Pakistan team on their neutral home territory.
Yeah, and Australia, I think they sort of surprised themselves. They've never really been good in the subcontinent style conditions, but nevertheless, they have had a good run. They've been pretty consistent with their results, and it'll be interesting to see these some of the new players that they're blooding into their lineups, like the likes of Mitchell Marsh and then Mitchell Starc in the bowling department, Josh Hazlewood in an Ashes test. how they go.
Well, of course, Ryan Harris, he was meant to be the man who went over there and gave it his last effort, but it seems now, well, it's been realised his last effort has been culminated at Sydney earlier this season against India, because he's pulled up stumps on his career due to that knee injury which he's carried with him for pretty much his entire career. But hats off to him regardless, and in a sense it's allowed this new generation to come through sooner than later, and they'll be better for the experience ultimately.
Exactly, and all we can say is good luck to our boys over there, and we hope for a good result.
We'll keep you in touch at the conclusion of each test how the locals are faring. Hopefully it's a good outcome. But anyway, I think that's probably all we've got time for. It's been a bumper edition.
It's been quite a bump, probably a record in terms of time for us today. But
plenty to get through, though, so I'm sure that you've now got plenty to keep you occupied until the next edition.
And we'll be back next Wednesday, of course. There's no Grand Prix on this weekend, and no Grand Prix on next weekend either, because the German race was cancelled. So our next race will be in 3 weeks' time. In 3 weeks' time at Hungary. But in between every Wednesday, we will have an edition up for you. So thank you very much from me, Jawad, and Baden.
Thank you. Enjoy your company next time.
Cheers.